My job is to call them out. I'm doing my job right now, don't worry. We are in a series called Hope as an Act of Resistance. We're just doing this for the month, and I think talking about hope and talking about resistance in this season of our lives, of our nation, of our world is pretty timely, if I don't say so myself, because these are confusing times. These are weird times. Granted, all times are confusing in the moment, but these feel especially like confusing times. I think in hindsight, we're going to look back at this era, whether you're single, married, parents, not parents, whatever's going on in your life. I think you'll look back at this time in your life with some clarity, but right now it just doesn't really feel that way, does it? I know for myself, I think we live in an era of conflicting interpretations of the truth, which makes things confusing. I get confused by news reporting that is saturated in fear. I get confused by let's call them open interpretations of things like fairness or justice or mercy. A lot of these words are up for grabs right now, and I get confused. And I'll be honest, in the last maybe call it 2-3 weeks, I got caught up in the game a little bit. I'll start off with some confession. I got caught up in the struggle to stay informed, because I think it's my Christian duty to understand what's going on in the world and try to have a Christ-shaped lens on it. But in that struggle to stay informed, I'm also struggling to have my opinions and my emotions shaped by Jesus. It's tough. I get caught in worry and confusion, and that word, I get caught in hopelessness often. The other word you could use is despair. Is despair maybe a prevailing feeling every once in a while? Maybe not all the time. I hope it's not a consistent feeling for you. Reach out, talk to somebody if that's the case. But every once in a while, I'll see a problematic tweet. I'll hear a news story. I'll get in a conversation. I'll overhear somebody on campus talking about whatever, and the pit kind of drops for a second. And it yo-yos, it hangs down there, and then it comes back up. But I live there sometimes. And in my life, I can take one of 3 problematic stances towards that hopelessness. I can despair. I can go, nothing's worth it. I can live in despair and say, nothing good is going to happen in this world. Give it up. Maybe one day I'll just get to heaven. I start humming I'll Fly Away to myself. I'll fly away. Like, come on, some of that. I try to do that, but that doesn't really work. Or I can sometimes celebrate. Maybe you feel celebratory towards some of the things that are happening in our world right now. You see news stories and you go, good, it ought to be that way. Okay, that's fair. Maybe you just rage and you get angry all the time. And maybe you don't even know why you're angry all the time. Any of those stances, though, I think it might betray a hope in the wrong things. Like Elias talked about last week, being very high on world events or very low on world events might mean that I have too much stake in world events. Yes, sir. Or rather, world events might have too much stake in me. I have to ask myself, why am I so high or so low about certain legislature? Why am I so high or so low about world news, about problematic tweets, about whatever is going on, about who wins the Super Bowl? Right. I think it's because of my internal reality. The external reality shouldn't have this kind of hold on me, but it does, more often than I care to admit, because my internal reality is that I cling to a hope in people or in events or causes or ideas that overpromise, and then what do? They underdeliver. And then I go back to the well and I go, maybe this time my hope will be made secure in a party or in a team or in a distraction, or in a film franchise, whatever it is for you. I know I can put my hope in external things that feel very grounded and real, and then they underdeliver. And hence, our series' focus on hope. We're in 1 Peter. Why? Because the posture of hope, I think specifically in these uncertain times, becomes a beacon for other people. It becomes this charged beam, like for the Sacramento Kings. It's a beam of resistance against the forces of sin and despair. Go Kings, baby. Light the beam. Anybody beam team? Did that go everywhere? That's fine. That's okay. Last week, Elias, I hope you can go back if you didn't listen to it. Last week, Elias talked about a living hope in 1 Peter 1, that Jesus is our living, present hope. Not our past hope, not a future thing, but here and now. And he defined hope as having joy in something, a joyful expectation of something that has not happened yet. Being joyful right now about something that's going to happen soon. However soon is soon. And I love that definition because that definition puts an emphasis on my choices and my posture. Joy isn't something that happens to me. It's something that I get to participate in. I get to step into the pool of joy and get warm and splash around a little bit. Today, we're talking about an inverted hope. So you can flip over to 1 Peter chapter 2.
Come on, bro, Josh.
I'm going to give you guys some responsibility. There's like half of you here, and so everybody has to be twice as loud. Whatever twice as loud is for you, except for Kevin, whatever twice as loud is for you, that's what we got to do today. We got to make up. We got to pick up some slack a little bit. Yeah. Turn over to 1 Peter 2. I'm not going to shout at you. Rachel doesn't like it when preachers shout. 1 Peter 2, chapter 4, verse 8. Verses 4 through 8. This is kind of the heart of the matter that Peter's getting at. Peter says, as you come to Jesus, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices into a spiritual house, sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, see, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone. And the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. Now to you who believe, this is tangentially written to us here today, us who believe in Jesus, this stone is precious. But to those who don't believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. This is the heart of the matter for Peter. Jesus is our shocking, enduring, absurd source of hope. I love that Peter goes out of his way to highlight how weird the gospel is. Because sometimes I'm sitting in it and I go like, this is pretty weird though, that I really believe in this stuff and I live according to it every single day. I can forget how odd a source of hope Jesus really is. You've got to remember, the entirety of Jewish history is pointing towards a Messiah, and then they get him, and it's like, this guy? Really? He's homeless, he's single, he has no political authority or sway. There's nothing to attract us to him. See, the powers that be will always attempt to discredit and shame Jesus, but their disbelief is their own downfall. It was true in Peter's day, and it's true in our day as well. And so for us to put our hope in this absurd, shocking, surprising Messiah requires a posture, there it is, a posture of trust and humility that actively rejects the world's definition of power. Wow. That presently, see, Ron, you got the memo. He's like, I'm going to talk. Thank you. I like it, actually. It actively, presently rejects the world's concept of authority or wisdom. And honestly, I struggle to make that leap. I struggle to make the leap from belief in Jesus to an imitation of Jesus. I can have a passive belief in Jesus, but to actively reject the powers that be is a different game entirely. I talk about this a lot with the campus, the difference between having faith in Jesus and the faith of Jesus. Faith in Jesus says Jesus can feed the 5,000. The faith of Jesus says Jesus has empowered me to feed the 5,000. Yoinks, right? That's a horse of a different color, if you know what I'm talking about. My danger is that it's entirely possible to preach Jesus and to quote Jesus and to worship Jesus and to get a tattoo of Jesus and to do all the Jesus-y things while denying him in my actual life. Wow. I can identify him with my words, but I don't identify with him in my actions, in rejection, in exile, in absurdity. I think I can struggle with this absurd idea because I don't want my life to look other or strange or foreign to other people. I want to fit in if I'm going to be completely honest. But Peter's aim in this passage and in this letter is to help us make a connection from hope in Jesus to identifying with Jesus in the way that we live. Jesus is the rejected stone, but when we choose him, we also choose his lifestyle. Jesus' rejection and his exile and his death and resurrection, these are not a shield for us. They are a pathway for us. And so we can be grateful for the life that Jesus lived, but we show our gratitude in the way that we imitate that life. I think about Luke 6, verse 40. No student is above his master. No student. Even if you're the valedictorian of our church, you are not going to be better than Jesus. And you will not have an easier road. Elias said some hard things last week. Things like, you were not promised an easy life. And I've had that rattling in my head all week when I have to shovel my driveway twice in a week. Come on, right? When Miles isn't napping the way that he's supposed to be, whatever that means. When life gets hard, when I have a commute that doesn't go the way that I need it to. When appointments cancel, I keep going, I wasn't promised an easy life. I wasn't promised an easy life. I was promised a life of exile and absurdity and rejection. Now here's the fun part. The inversion, the inverted gospel is that at the exact moment that the powers that be are rejecting us, God chooses us. At the exact moment that we feel exiled and alone and desperate and despairing, Jesus steps in and gives us hope. Check this out in verse 9. He says, you, again, tangentially us, we are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. Take a second with that. We are God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. We are called to be defiant and resistant and absurd and weird, but hopeful. To take on a posture that trusts God's selection over the world's. That trusts God's favor over the world's. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We take a risk when we choose Jesus. Of course it's a risk. I'm sure you felt it in your own life, but God is taking a much bigger risk on us. Who's really taking the bigger leap of faith between yourself and the creator of the universe who gives you a chance? Big question for us. Does my life reflect a hope in Jesus or a hope in somebody else or something else? Some cause, some future that I've planned out for myself, a partner, a loved one, a spouse, my kids, a politician, an actor, a sports celebrity person. You can tell I'm watching a lot of sports these days. What hope does my life reflect? Well, if you're struggling with that question, who praises you? Who aligns with you? Who criticizes or shames you? It seems like Peter doesn't have the American value that we all value of having your cake and eating it too. Seems like that's not going to work for Peter or for the disciples of his day. At some point down the line, identifying with Christ will mean walking in his footsteps of ridicule, disdain, and rejection. Someone's not going to like you. I like you. I think we all like each other very much, but you're going to encounter resistance at some point. And Peter's hopeful challenge for us is to lean into the resistance, to lean into the mistreatment. I used to do a stretching routine. Hold your applause, right? I'm 32, I got to stretch now. And there's something that the guy on the YouTube video, I'm such a cool person, the guy in the YouTube video says, he says, find ease in your effort. And I stick with that often. Find ease in your effort. Find ease in your effort. But I got to have some kind of effort to find ease in. Sometimes I find ease in my ease. I find ease in my not sharing the gospel with people. I find ease in doing things my own way. I find ease in comfort and Netflix and the Girl Scout cookies that the Murphy's daughters gave me. That's the best that there is. You know what I'm saying? Thin Mints in the freezer. Let's talk about it. I find ease in my ease. I don't find ease in my effort.
Wow.
I don't find ease in my mistreatment, my hardship, my rejection. Peter digs in. He starts to get specific from verses 11 through 25. It was a lot of text, so I'm just going to read it instead. I'm sure you have a very cool device that you can read it on as well. Verse 11, and I want you to take notice of the verbs that Peter uses. He says, "Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in this world to abstain from sinful desires, which war against your soul. live such good lives among the pagans that although they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Here's where it gets like really fun. Submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men. Come on. Whether to the king as the supreme authority or to the governors who are sent by God to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing so, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Wow. Live as free men, but don't use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers. Fear God. Honor the king. Slaves, submit yourselves to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if a man bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because he is conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you endure a beating for doing something wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his footsteps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. This is a primer, a masterclass, if you will, in hopeful resistance. This is what it looks like. It looks like graciously accepting the negative outcomes of a righteous life. Doing the right thing, getting the wrong result, and then doing the right thing again. It might mean mistreatment. It might mean rejection, but we have the opportunity to entrust ourselves to him who judges justly. All of these hardships are opportunities to imitate Jesus and to entrust ourselves to the one who chose us. These were the opportunities that the early Christians, they literally died for. They saw glory in it, to be mistreated the way that Jesus was mistreated. Wow. I get to get crucified like my Lord. These were not even necessarily considered hardships oftentimes for these folks. They thought, these are glories. These are opportunities to be like Jesus. Wow. What a blessing to be mistreated the way that he was mistreated. Now, here's something incredibly important. I actually talked with one of my students about this week. This paradigm of mistreatment is not justification of the mistreatment. There's some weird branches of Christianity throughout history, especially in our country, that used passages like this to sort of empower slave owners, empower mistreatment of others, specifically racially. Of like, oh, you're being mistreated, but good, you get to be like Jesus. No, that is not the gospel.
Right. Come on, Josh.
I think about the character of injustice. It's startlingly relevant right now to read about slaves and masters, not because we live in a society with slaves and masters, but we live in a society of mistreatment and tears, right? I walk around, I see things, I'll put it that way. I see things online and I see things in real life. Folks try to grasp at whatever amount of power they hold and kick down anybody even a fraction below that level of power or authority. It's scary and it's indecent. Some things are just wrong. I think about this month specifically. It's Black History Month. We get to celebrate the heroes of the civil rights movement. As they fought for their rights, there was no moment where they were like, I get it though. I get this mistreatment. No, some things are just wrong. Some arrests are just unlawful. Most violence, I would argue, is completely unjustified. There's no instance where corruption makes sense, but we live in it. And when we respond like Jesus, our response gets to be the story rather than the mistreatment.
That's right.
I'm going to say that again.
Say that again.
Some things are just wrong, but when we respond like Jesus, our response gets to be the story rather than the mistreatment.
That's right. Really good. That's right.
Think about how many news stories where it's like 30 are dead today because some awful instance of violence. This unlawful arrest happened. This power group is mistreating this powerless group. But think about the stories where things get inverted. Where folks overcome with nonviolent civil disobedience, with love, with submission, honor, respect, righteousness, and humility. That is what becomes the story. The story becomes, can you believe the character of these people? Can you believe the hope and I don't even know what the word would be, just the character that they have? David Brooks, in the book The Road to Character, he says, these sorts of people, they radiate a sort of moral joy. They answer softly when challenged harshly. They are silent when unfairly abused. They are dignified when others try to humiliate them. They are restrained when others try to provoke them. But they get things done. They perform acts of sacrificial service with the same modest, everyday spirit that they would display as if they were just getting the groceries. There's something that happens when I choose to imitate Jesus. Humility, righteousness, respect, honor, submission become a way of life for me. Now, that is a hard road. It is a road to character, amen? When I walk that road, it becomes second nature. It becomes who I am and not just a thing I do. Now, I will pause here and I will confess I am what I am. I am a college-educated, white millennial man. I'm physically healthy. I've been blessed with good mental health. I have not had to suffer under injustice in my lifetime, really in any important way. I haven't experienced the forms of mistreatment that are typical to our nation, towards women, towards people of color or different cultural backgrounds, towards immigrants. But I have been a disciple for nearly 20 years. I've experienced the rejection that comes with integrity, accountability, honesty, and obedience to Jesus. I've experienced the disdain of coworkers who can't understand my desire for integrity in and out of the church. I've experienced the disrespect and humiliation of my biblical sexual ethic. I've experienced confusion and rejection from peers who can't understand why I'm still committed to this weird church thing that honestly has been a place of hurt for me at times. You're still doing it? You're still a Christian, even though that thing happened? Even though I know that guy said that thing to you? Although, but you remember Luke 6? No student is greater than his master. And no student gets to skip the line. No student gets a shortcut. More relevant to me is verse 21. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his footsteps. That's different. This is what Peter's getting at. He says any life, not just a Christian life, life with Jesus, life without Jesus, is full of rejection. But are you going to get rejected for the right things? Are you going to get rejected for things that you're going to be proud of in 5, 10, 100, 1,000 years? Am I being rejected for my obedience to Christ or my obedience to my sinful nature or the powers that be? To recap, a posture of submission, a posture of honor, respect, righteousness, and humility, it's completely foreign. It's been exiled in our society. It's strange. It's rejected by men, but it's approved of and honored by God. The promise, if Jesus is your living cornerstone, is that you get to be part of the building. He says, you also are living stones. You also are being built into a spiritual household. But where does this play out? Where does it happen? Where do I get to experience the intersection of rejection from men and acceptance from God? Where do I get to actively imitate Jesus? Because now I've convinced you in only 15 to 20 minutes. Does it happen at a protest? Does it happen in a march for rights? Does it happen at a petition for certain legislature? Does it happen in the voting booth? Does it happen in the endless online debates and derisive think pieces of various news outlets? Does it happen when I'm chronically online? Does it happen when I grumble in a group chat or verbally spar with my weird uncle at Thanksgiving? No. Most likely not. What Peter would contend is that the crucible of Christian hope is your living room. Mic drop. Oh, that's cool. I thought there'd be like a, ooh. That's kind of cool, actually. Let me show you. Chapter 3, verse 1. And I'm just going to tell you ahead of time, I can't get into all of it. There's so much, guys, and it's so important, especially for this world that we're living in. I encourage you to go back and study this passage, but I'm going to hit a few things here. Chapter 3, verse 1, wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe in the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. Not a lot of wives calling their husbands their Lord. That's maybe gotten out of the vernacular. That might be a good thing. You are her daughters. You're Sarah's daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Husbands, in the same way, meaning everything that was just told to the wives also applies to you. We don't get to ignore all that, the first 5 verses. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Bait and switch marriage sermon. Bang! Peter contends that our marriages, our parenting, our household lives are where we develop the posture of resistant hope.
That's it.
Wow.
Your hope will not be cultivated out in Congress. It won't happen online. Definitely not there. It will happen as you work through conflict with the people you spend every day with.
Right.
It will happen in the face of mistreatment and rejection from the people that you love the most. Honestly, where do you experience more rejection and mistreatment than in your home? Honestly. Like, do you guys want to talk about it? Like, after? After. Cool. Sounds good. Sounds good. Like, I can be upset at what some celebrity tweets or what some politician tries to get through Congress, but honestly, like, I don't know these people.
Right.
I can feel hurt by them, but they don't think about me. Who thinks about me a lot, and I'm grateful for it, is my wife. And that's why it feels more personal when we mistreat each other, or ignore each other, or reject each other. Hey, unmarried people, where are my unmarried folks at? Ow, ow, single, let's go. I feel you pulling back, that's okay. I'm gonna urge you to not check out for the next few minutes, and here's why. The principles we're gonna hit here do not just apply to marriage. Maybe you will be married one day, in which case, maybe get a head start on some of this stuff. But even if you're not, you still need to entrust yourself to him who judges justly.
Right.
You still will have roommates and coworkers and neighbors and friends who are going to mistreat you and that you're going to mistreat and get into conflict with. So I urge you, don't ignore this. Back to the action, shall we? There's a lot I can't get to. There's some modesty stuff that I think is really powerful, but that's a different sermon for a different time. But for wives and for husbands and for everybody else, we can focus on the character that is being formed as we graciously handle conflict like Jesus. A few examples. When we honor one another, husbands and wives, in conflict, rather than escalating that conflict, because I just like to fight. When we practice mutual submission instead of grasping for our way. When we show humility and respect in our differences. That is when we reflect the true hope of Jesus. The simple truth is that our spouses will wrong us more often, more powerfully, and more deeply than any authority figure, no matter whether you like them or not. So the way we handle the most personal kind of conflict, the way we handle the most potent disagreements, is reflective of where our true hope lies. In contrast, what hope gets revealed when I approach my God-appointed partner with hostility, with self-righteousness, disrespect, publicly or privately, with ignorance, with dismissiveness, with forcefulness? What does that posture say to my wife and to the world?
Right.
The way I treat Allie explains to you fully the way I think about Jesus.
That's it. There you go.
It's powerful.
There you go.
It's potent. And Allie and I work really hard at this posture of mutual respect and submission. We worked together for about 3 years before we even dated. And so we got to work through some of that communication and conflict stuff, and normally we do a really good job of respecting one another. I love our marriage, and I'm so grateful for the work that we consistently put into honoring one another above ourselves. But, there's always a but all marriages have their limits. All relationships, your best friendships have their limits, and the stressors of life for us, having a 2-year-old, having another one on the way, having bills, weird flex, but okay, 2 kids, all right. Having bills, having meaningful work to do at the campus, but it can be tough work at times. All of these stressors provide ample opportunity for us to display all of the unhopeful traits that are still lodged in here somewhere and haven't shaken loose quite yet. There is grace, but there are a lot of opportunities to show that grace. So, back to the beginning, moreover, I struggle with what I see in the news and online, which has nothing to do with Allie. I don't think that she's doing most of the world events, right? I don't blame her for airplanes going down or any of that stuff. But I struggle with what I see in the news and online, and the bad behavior and the weak character that I see in our authority figures and in our world challenges my hope for Christ. What's the connection? Connection is that I can recognize in that moment of disdain for the lack of character, I can recognize the raw hypocrisy at work when I publicly criticize unjust and dishonorable behavior and then privately imitate it.
Wow. Come on.
I hope you can see that hypocrisy too. How can I lament the bulldozing of politicians who demand their way and then emotionally bulldoze my wife to get my own way? Is it fair for me to condemn the egos and the vanity of our leaders while also refusing to ask for help in my marriage and my parenting?
Come on, Josh.
Wow.
No, it's not fair. Not a trick question. Can I publicly decry the fact that many people's needs are not being met by the authorities and then ignore the needs of my wife and my children? Do I get to do that as a follower of Jesus? No. And of course, I'm speaking in extremes, guys. None of us would actively, intentionally live that kind of disembodied, do as I say, not as I do posture. But from my experience, it's not that uncommon to hate that and then be like, but I'm going to steal a few notes because that actually might work over here.
Wow.
It's a tough intersection to live in. My conscience burns when I see this lack of character in other people, and then it gets really quiet in confronting my own thoughts and heart. I can see how unfair it is for that guy to treat that girl that way, or that couple, or that leader, or that whatever. But then when I do it, it's like, actually, it makes more sense. And if you just listen for a second, I can really explain and justify. Thus, Peter's incredible call to hope-filled homes.
Wow.
To marriages, parenting, roommates, households that can embrace conflict, embrace mistreatment, and then transform them into moments of resistant hope.
That's it.
Wow.
That when I fight with my wife, not if, unfortunately, but when, because we're going to disagree on whether we should get sushi or pizza. When we fight, that turns into a moment of hope and resistance and justice. I have an opportunity before me, and we each have opportunities before us daily to build Christ-centered homes of submission, honor, respect, righteousness, and humility. To build the kind of homes that stand in sharp rebuke of the injustices of our time and shine a light. Another question for us, does my home reflect a hope in Jesus or in someone else? The way that I treat my spouse will tell you everything you need to know about what I think about Jesus. So check me on it when you see it, if you see it. We have an incredible group of young married folks with kids. I see some Stroziks and some Adams back there. I see the Weirs. I see the Fitzmyers. We have an incredible group, and we're getting into each other's lives in this way that's mostly super fun, but can be a little bit uncomfortable at times. Of like, are we going to share that fight? Are we going to go there with this question about our parenting? But that vulnerability, that openness is starting to create hope in this generation of young couples and young parents who are trying to do it better. because we could not possibly do it by ourselves. Guys, this is the revolution that will infuse hope into this generation. And it begins in your living room, in your kitchen, in your bedroom, in the not-so-small conflicts and mistreatments that Christ inverts into moments of hopeful resistance. As we live in the hope of Jesus, we stand as a new kind of resistance, not with violence, not with slogans, but with spirituality, with submission and humility and righteousness. People that are foreign and exiled by the powers that be, but miraculously selected by God to be his banner of hope. Thank you guys for your time. I love you. Have a great rest of your day.